1,500 people are freezing in the Atlantic. The stress rockets are lighting up the night sky. And just miles away, a ship watches it all happen and does nothing. Over 100 years later, the story of the RMS Titanic still isn't as clear as we think, because what happened that night might not be what we've been told. Welcome back to the Common Historian. I'm Jeremy, and tonight we're diving into one of the Titanic's darkest mysteries with our author, Dr. Paul Lee. So grab your favorite beverage, dim the lights, and let's talk about what really happened on April 15th, 1912. Welcome, Dr. Lee. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
Oh, doing well. Thank you for coming on. I know we've been working on trying to get you on for a little while. I'm excited to finally, get to chat with you.
Yeah, me too. It all paid off in the
So,
end.
so you were born, I believe, Halloween 1971, and you built a career in both, being an author. I believe you're also a nuclear physics as well, and paranormal researcher. How does a physicist approach ghost hunting differently than most investigators?
I try to look at it more rationally than most people. I found out that most ghost researchers these days just tend to accept things on blind faith. They don't question the evidence that they're given, most of which is pitiful, to be honest. They really should try and assess the data that they've got and also try and determine from a historical sense of view whether what they found is true or not. It takes quite a bit of effort, but it's well worth it in the end. So I just tend to look at things from an evidentiary point of view. I've been on a few ghost hunts, which were quite embarrassing, to be honest, because it's just full of believers, and the smallest sound or the tiniest thing is misconstrued as evidence of ghosts, and that's just not the way of doing it. The field is also full of people who put their blind faith in psychics and use equipment that they honestly don't know how they work. So they could be getting a lot of false positives and they wouldn't know. To be blunt, that drives me up the wall. That drives me insane when I see that. So I'd look at it as from a physicist's point of view, as not as a scientist or historian's point of view, of trying to determine whether what we've been told is just the truth or not, rather than just blind acceptance. There's already so much rubbish in this field. We don't pollute it anymore with false claims. And that's just my method of working, my modus operandi.
I like to research the history and then tie
Yes.
it to the evidence. I think that's the
Yes.
best. That's just my way of doing it. I actually will be going on my first overnight investigation in May at Wildwood Sanitarium in New York. Very excited about that. So I've been studying about the history of Wildwood and hoping to kind of tie whatever we find to that.
Yeah.
But of course, we do have a lot of TV and even on YouTube, who everywhere, everything's a demon when they go investigate, and I try to stay away from that part.
Well, learning a bit about the history of these places can be fun. It's arduous, but it can be incredibly rewarding. And there's a couple of ghost stories in the UK that I'm familiar with. And for decades, they have been propagated as factual. And whereas I don't doubt that people have experienced the odd things, when you try and reconcile what ghost hunters and ghost researchers have said with the actual historical record, there's actually a huge chasm between the two. But people just don't like to go into the historical side of things because it really is too much effort. And I speak from experience here. I spend many, many months going to my local library, going through newspapers, very old books, interviewing people online and trying to ascertain the truth of these things. And there's a very, very famous ghost case close to where I live. And for about 50 years, people have talked about two mediums who contacted three ghosts as if it was verifiable fact. And none of the people who the mediums got in touch with ever existed. And all the details they gave were complete codswallop, absolute rubbish. And with a bit of research, this could be found out, and yet it is still repeated over and over again in books and podcasts, on the TV. So it's satisfying when you find out the truth, but it's also a little bit demoralizing because you realize that, as I said before, what people have done is they have just accepted what's been said at face value and haven't taken the research any further. And that's frustrating. And very often I've looked at cases and I think, well, someone really should try and research this, go back to basics. And I found that no one has. And then I realized through gritted teeth, oh God, it's going to be me, isn't it? And it's satisfying. It takes a lot of work to do, but it's also fun because when you find out these facts for yourself, you realize you are the very, very first person probably in the whole world who's got to the bottom of all this. And that is exciting. And I also found that quite exciting when I was doing my PhD in physics, that you were seeing things for the very, very first time. And that kind of excitement never leaves you. It stays with you for the rest of your life. And it can be a little bit intoxicating at times. You want the next fix, but it's a benign fix. It's not a harmful one.
Well, I know over here in the US, we have a lot of different famous places, but I know in England, there is tons of places that it's on my bucket list to go there someday. So, especially Scotland, I really want to Scotland too.
You would be spoiled for choice. There's a hell of a lot of good places. And a lot of places to avoid as well. The tourist traps that charge a fortune, and their ghostly reputation is pathetic, to be honest. But there's many places you can just museum, pubs, hotels. You can walk in off the street, and they're overflowing with spooky stories. And they're the ones which are great fun. And a lot of people don't mind talking openly about their ghost stories. But I say you've got to be careful about the places that charge a fortune for access. They're the ones to be wary of.
Yeah, and I was actually on your website. I think you have a whole nice list of the hotels and pubs and all of that. I haven't read it all, but I was just kind of browsing through, and I was like, wow, there's a lot that I didn't even realize.
I think I've got about 6,100 on my list, and it's growing daily. I've just come across a whole list of haunted pubs that I'm going through one by one and contacting them, trying to find a few more details. That's taking a long time to do. But most of them are places I've never heard of before in parts of the country I've never been to. And sometimes they come back and say, no, nothing here, or it was a fabrication. But a few have come forward and say, yes, they do have spooky stuff going on. And it's intoxicating because you think you're the first person ever to hear about this. There's a website which lists pubs across the UK. I'm going through that. And it just gives a one line, it gives a resume of the pub, its history, what beers they sell and whatever. And they usually give a one line summary of the ghosts, say, this place is reputedly haunted. And that's it. And the only way to find out more is to go on their website or contact them direct. And sometimes they say, yes, we've got some ghosts here. And a lot of time they don't respond. But you've got that one tantalizing little glimmer of fresh data, and that keeps me going.
Oh, yeah. So I guess we probably should, I know we kind of went into the ghosts early, but I want to get into the Titanic. That's the main thing for our episode today. So you discovered the Titanic story, I think, in 1985.
That's right, yes.
When the wreck was found. What grabs you about the disaster specifically?
I always get asked this, and I can never answer it properly. I always say, if I knew what it was that gripped me about the Titanic, I would bottle and sell it. I'd make a fortune. I do not know why it has gripped me. I think probably at the time, I regarded this like a huge time capsule of the way we used to live. And the ship hadn't been seen for well over 70 years, and no one knew what condition it was, what state it was. I only knew a little bit about the Titanic from lessons at school, but they didn't touch in any great detail on the story. But when the ship was officially found, it just absolutely gripped my imagination, because there was something that was in the textbooks, and now all of a sudden it became real. It wasn't just a line in a history book; it was now tangibly real. And again, I wanted to know more about it, what condition the ship was in, the people on board, and whatever. But until that time, it was just something I wasn't really interested in, because we'd only touched on it briefly in the school. So the answer, that was waffly. The real answer is I don't know why I'm so interested, and a lot of people say the same thing.
Oh yeah, and I've never really. I've looked into the Titanic, but I've never really researched it in depth.
Yeah,
overall,
there's just so much to go through.
Yeah, there's a lot. So So, listeners who don't know, there is a story about the Californian incident. And why is it that the most kind of divisive issue in Titanic research, even 114 years later?
It certainly is divisive. It's, I think, next to the issue of salvage and the moral ethics of artifact retrieval, it is probably the one single issue that divides people. And I think it just comes down to people trying to assert their moral and research skills ahead of other people. It all comes down to the fact you've got the Californian, the captain, and a few of the crews insisting that the two ships were never in sight and the rocket seen was some other form of signaling. But then you get the other branch of researchers who say that the ships were in sight and that Captain Lord of the Californian was guilty of negligence for not at least waking up the wireless operator and not going to help. You've got these two camps, and they both cherry pick little bits of evidence from the inquiries and from books and interviews that have been published since then to try and prove their case. And it gets very, very argumentative because on both sides, you get people choosing the little bits of evidence that supports their theory and try and dismiss, sometimes in a very scurrilous, almost abusive way, the stance and viewpoint of the opposing researchers. And that's when it degenerates into acrimony and arguments. And it's not very pleasant to deal with at times. Now, that makes it sound very even-handed, that the pro-Californian side is evenly matched against the anti-Californian side. But up until the mid-1990s or so, the evidence from the inquiries was not widely available. It's very hard to find. And then it was all transcribed to the internet, and then everyone could see for themselves firsthand what was being said both in America and at the British inquiry. And then at the anti-Californian camp could see for the first time just how much had been cherry-picked in favor of Captain Lord by his supporters. And you would have thought the supporters would slink off into the distance with their tail between their legs and say, okay, we've been found out, our research has been quite poor, and we'll leave it at that. But no, they came back with a volley of arguments and insults to try and prove their case. I'd say up until about the 1990s, the two arguments were evenly matched. But about 1991, a book came out called The Ship That Stood Still by Leslie Reed, which is now out of print. Unfortunately, readers deserve to be reprinted. And he is very much against Captain Lord. And his book had a lot of brand new research and also extracts from inquiries that had been suppressed or ignored by the pro-Californian camp. And when that book came out, a lot of support for Captain Lord evaporated overnight. And I was actually one of them because I didn't realize how much had been left out by Captain Lord supporters. Unfortunately, a lot of the Titanic societies were very much enamored with the pro-Californian side because their chief proponent had ingratiated himself in their camps. And they made sure that Leslie Reed's book did not get the publicity it deserved. And it wasn't ignored, it just wasn't known about. I only found it by chance going into a bookstore in London, and there was a huge pile of them. And until that time, I hadn't even received any publicity or noticed that there was a book of this nature coming out. And I started reading it, and I was getting a bit angry reading because I thought Leslie Reed is taking the anti-Californian side of the case. And I thought, this is completely wrong. But the more I read and the more I found out for myself, I realized that he'd done his basic research and the pro-Californian camp hadn't. And they'd suppressed a lot of stuff that wasn't in their favor. And when I realized that, I switched to the opposing camp, and I've been there ever since. So well over 30 years now. So that is one instant in the Titanic community that really does rile people, and it isn't pleasant at times. I would say to anyone, if you're going to be involved with the California controversy, don't. Just walk away. It's not worth getting involved. The arguments are really horrendous.
Oh my!
It is that.
I wasn't overly familiar with it. In preparation for this interview, I was reading a little bit on it, but I was, like I said, I had never really looked into it too much. But it's very interesting.
Well, it all comes down to the fact that in 1912 there were 3 ways of signaling distress at night, and the one that interests us It says rockets of any color or description fired one at a time at short intervals. And that is exactly what the Titanic did. And that is exactly what the Californian saw. And all the officers on the Californian were aware of the rules. But for some reason, the urgency just did not get through to the captain, who remained below asleep on the chart room. Second Officer Stone either whistled down using the speaking tube to the captain or sent the apprentice, a lad named Gibson, to inform Captain Lord what was going on. And all Captain Lord said was, "Are there any colours in them?" And he said, "Keep using the Morse lamp and try and get in touch with them." I think if the bridge officer, Stone, had been a little bit more proactive and just ventured an opinion that what he was seeing were distress rockets, I think that Captain Lord might have roused himself and done something. He might not have been able to save anyone. He might have arrived too late, but he would have at least tried. But I can't help but feel that the message from the bridge just did not get through to the captain. And exactly why that is still debated to this day. It's been suggested that Second Officer Stone was a little bit in awe of Captain Lord. Stone apparently did not have a very good relationship with his father, who is very distant. And Stone might have seen something of that in Captain Lord. And Stone might have been the kind of person who wouldn't necessarily volunteer information with this domineering, autocratic master of the ship. So he just reported the basic information, but without giving his opinion or viewpoint. And if he had done that, I think the situation might have been very different. But I don't think the Californian could have saved anyone from the water. He would have arrived too late. But at least he would have tried.
Yeah, yeah. I was kind of shocked when I was reading about that. I was like, wow, that's if they actually did see it, they should have alerted someone or had tried to help. So your book presents every piece of evidence without taking sides. After all the research, I think you mentioned it a minute ago. What is your conclusion of exactly what happened that night?
Well, I'm
Uh,
absolutely convinced that the two ships were in sight of each other. And I'm convinced that the Californians saw the Titanic's distress rockets. There are little bits in the evidence that don't quite mesh, but they're actually quite minor compared to the bulk of what was said. So that's my basic viewpoint, but I'm not 100% sure as to the psychology behind what happened that night. Leslie Reed did a lot of work on this, and of course, he had access to people who have now since passed away. So,
yeah,
and Leslie Reed died in 1991, so we will never know for sure what happened. But I think his conclusion was quite right that Stone was Second Officer Stone, who was the watch officer when the rockets were going up, was a little bit in awe of Captain Lord, and he just did not. He couldn't vocalize what he was seeing to the captain, and instead he just chatted with the apprentice Gibson on the bridge, and just waited for the captain to make a decision. But you could say that the captain was waiting for Stone to give him the information, but Stone didn't want to give it. So you've got these two immovable objects in collision course, and neither of them are going to yield.
yeah,
But
yeah,
what they should have done was Stone should have really impressed upon the captain that he was seeing rockets that he thought were distress, and then they would have woken the wireless operator. They would have known in minutes what was going on, and the Californian had a steam running all night in case they had to get away from the icebergs and the ice field, which was alongside, and they could have been underway in just a few more minutes. But as I say, it wouldn't have been any difference. They would have arrived far too late to save anyone. But nothing was done.
yeah.
So that's my
Uh,
conclusion. The two ships
that's your
were in sight.
conclusion?
That's my so you don't need to buy the book now. Well, actually,
And let me see here. I lost my place. So um, you spent years in archives inquiring transcripts and letters. What one piece of evidence completely, other than that book, changed how you understand that night that you physically found? Anything different other than the book?
I don't think there's been anything I found in archives and libraries that made me sit up and take notice as to that this has changed my viewpoint of the disaster. I did go to the British Library quite a lot, going through newspapers for my second Titanic book. That took a long time to do. And I found little interesting snippets of information, but nothing that really changed my viewpoint as to what was going on. My opinions have altered over the years. I've become a lot more skeptical as to what was said at the inquiries, particularly by the crewmen. But that's not from what I've learned from archives. It's from going through the inquiries in a really deep sense, going through it line by line and comparing and correlating what others have said. And if you do that, you find that a lot of crewmen, they told whopping great fibs. And I think that they did that to hide their own incompetence or to make
Yeah.
themselves appear more brave than they were. But there could be a variety of reasons. The White Star Line was part of a shipping conglomerate called the International Mercantile Marine, which controlled under the control of J.P. Morgan, and they controlled a lot of shipping lines around the world. And I had a thought that people are not going to tell the truth if they think that their livelihoods are going to be threatened. If they're blacklisted, that's their career over and done with. You get a lot of people in inquiries and in newspapers heaping praise on J. Bruce Ismay, the chairman of the White Star Line, who was saved. And I think, I just reading them, I think, are they, well, using the phrase, are they buttering his bread, so to speak? Are they saying something
Yeah.
that would cast Ismay in a favorable light? Because otherwise they'd be blacklisted and lose their jobs. I mean, the IMM
Yeah.
control a lot of ships around the world, and they're never going to be employed by any of them. So at the inquiries, you find all these people, and not one of them, not one person who was called, said anything bad about the White Star Line. They didn't venture anything critical, and they didn't suggest anything. We've got quite a few witnesses who were asked, "Is there anything further you'd like to say?" And they said, "No, nothing at all." But privately, they said things very differently. I think that's because they didn't want their crewmen to be viewed in a bad light. But there's not much evidence for it. It's just my gut feeling from reading through the inquiries that I think people would be afraid of being blacklisted.
Yeah. And that makes sense.
That makes sense.
So I know I asked you before we started recording a little bit about ghosts, and it sounds like that you have not found too much when you've researched on the Titanic ghosts. For a tragedy of this magnitude, why aren't there more ghost stories, do you think?
I really don't know. I was quite surprised by that. I think there's only a couple of ghost stories from the era. And in recent years, you've had a few people with very dubious accounts of encountering ghosts since Cameron's movie came out. Like you get people saying, "Oh, I felt something odd in my home and something moved by itself and there'd been cold spots and whatever." And they say, "Oh, and Captain Smith was born here or lived here in his teen years." And they make the connection through a very, very very odd process of evidential selection that, oh, it must be Captain Smith's ghost. But there's no evidence to support that it is. It could be any reason why they're feeling a bit odd. And a couple of pubs, I think there's one in Ireland that's got Titanic memorabilia, and they say the same thing. And I think the connection is people experience odd things because they've got the memorabilia in there. But there's very little in the way that connects the victims with the latter day accounts. What you get are many cases of premonitions and a lot of stories to do with W.T. Stead, who was a spiritualist and who went down on the Titanic, and he was on his way to talk at a peace conference in New York. And because he was a spiritualist, not long afterwards, lots of mediums afterwards claimed to be in contact with him. But a friend of mine in America wrote a book on psychic connections with the Titanic, and he devotes a whole chapter to W.T. Stead. And some are convincing, but most of them less so. And W.T. Stead has a personal connection with me because I grew up in a town in the northeast of England called Darlington. And W.T. Stead was the editor of the newspaper, the Northern Echo, not when I was there, obviously. And the Northern Echo is still running to this day. And there is a memorial stone to him outside the town library, which is opposite the old Northern Echo buildings. And the local pub just down the road is named after him. So that's connected between me and Stead. But I didn't realize that till after the disaster, when someone pointed out there was a memorial stone outside the library. I went to look, and bingo, there it was. I walked past it many times and paid no attention to it, and there it was.
Wow.
So I think I did find one account that I don't know if I read it on your site or somewhere, but violinist John Woodworth's haunting at the Devonshire Park Theatre. Are you familiar with that
Oh, yes.
story?
Yeah, I tried looking into that and I couldn't find any more information about
You
it.
couldn't find any
But
more. I
that
couldn't
was
either.
one
I
of
was curious.
yeah, it was
You had
mentioned. It was just one line in a book that I read many years ago, and that is, I think, the only contemporary ghost story that I know of from Titanic. I can't think of any off the top of my head. Everything else is from the modern day era, like I say, Captain Smith's homes and whatever, or this pub in Belfast. That's the only one that I know of, which I thought was a little bit surprising, but
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I thought there'd be more.
I really don't know.
Another
I can't think what I'm doing.
I did notice the Captain Smith's home. I think he's been seen at like the Adelphi Hotel in Liverpool.
Yeah.
But when looking at these types of things, how do you evaluate these sightings, both as a physicist and a paranormal researcher?
Well, to be honest, ghosts and science do not mix. They're like oil and water. Unless there is a massive breakthrough in either field, I don't think we will ever come to a consensus to what ghosts actually are, which that's frustrating, but it's also fun. Excuse me. Because if the mystery was solved, the fun would go. It's always nice to have an open ended mystery because anyone can contribute to it. And that's exciting. So it's good that the mystery is not being solved. From a that's a physicist or a scientist point of view. From a historian's point of view, all you can really do is collect these little snippets of evidence and hope that somehow they correlate with other bits of evidence which can bolster or reinforce what you already have. And sometimes that happens, and usually it doesn't. A lot of these ghost stories are just one-offs. They occur once and they never occur again, and they are maddeningly hard to research because you can't find identity for the ghost. You can't say anything at all about them. That's annoying. I've come across quite a few of those, and you just have to throw your hands in the air and say, "I've done as much as I can do with this. It's time to walk away." But there's always a hope that at some point in the future you'll get a little bit more evidence which could solve it. So, on both historians, on a paranormal investigative point of view, and a physicist point of view, it's frustrating and it's maddening, but it's good that the mystery is still there. Because if the mystery was solved, where would the fun be?
Yeah, there would be no fun if it was all solved.
Absolutely, yes.
I have read that some ships passing the wreck site have reported phantom signals on their radios, and also submarines have picked up distress calls with no source. What do you make of those?
And there's a lot of psychic phenomena connected with the Titanic that I don't actually know about. And this is one of them. My friend in America, George, has written another book which has yet to be published, which lists a lot of psychic phenomena. And I haven't been through it yet, to be honest. I've only quickly flicked through it. And the only one that I could think of was many decades later, and I think we're talking about the 1960s. A very, very large ship was seen off the Grand Banks of Newfoundland, and the ships that got close saw the name Olympic on the side. Now, the Olympic is the Titanic sister ship. It went to the breakers in 1935, and apart from fixtures and fittings, nothing survives of it. And these ships saw what appeared ostensibly to be the ghost of the SS Olympic. And it's been confirmed there were no other ships in the area, and so none called the Olympic in that area. Now, is this a true story or is it just an urban myth? We really don't know. But George mentioned this in his book. And of course, I sat and took notice, and hopefully one day someone will come up. But you can't really hoax a 882-foot long ship.
No,
So it's either a hoax or a spectacular ghost story. But I don't know anything at all about spurious SOS signals, rockets or lights being seen in the area. So I can't really comment on that. Sorry.
that's perfectly fine. I just read that, so I figured I'd ask you about it. Speaking of the Olympic, my daughter actually heard that I was doing this interview. She was like, "You should ask him about Well, she's into conspiracy theories, and
Oh,
there
yeah,
is one that the Olympic was actually the one that sank and not the Titanic.
yeah.
I don't know how true that is. I haven't looked into it, but she was all into that, and she was like, "Oh, you should ask him about that." And I,
Well, I think my facial expression tells me everything you need to know about
yeah,
it. I shall refrain from using strong language, but I would say that it's absolute bull. What happened was Robin Gardner, who proposed this theory, he went through the inquiries in great detail and many books, and anything that didn't make sense in his eyes, he put them in his book. Now, if you've gone through his book, you think he's accumulated a great deal of compelling evidence. But that's the whole point, to bamboozle the reader into thinking he's done a lot of research, when in fact all he's done is just concoct all these little bits that didn't make sense and try and win over the audience. And he's succeeded. A lot of people believe it, but it just doesn't make sense. From the time the Olympic arrived back at Harlan and Wolff for repairs to the time she resumed her New York crossings, I think it was something like 2 months. And the amount of work needed to transfer all the fiction fittings from the Olympic to the Titanic is just impossible. At that time in September 1911, the Titanic was basically an empty shell. They'd put a lot of the machinery on board. They'd only managed to put up one funnel and one mast. They put some boilers and the engines on board, and the rest of the ship was just practically empty. So we expect to believe that in 6 to 8 weeks, they transferred all of the fittings from the Olympic to the Titanic. And this didn't occur to me till a few years back when I saw a photograph of the Olympic being outfitted at Harlan and Wolff. Although the facility was closed, there were no high fences around the Harlan and Wolff. You could see the shipyard for miles around. And yet we've got the whole populace of Belfast who could see what was going on. And not one of them asked why were they moving funnels, masts, and engines from one ship to the other. It would have been really obvious because, I say, the Olympic arrived back from Southampton with 4 funnels. The Titanic had 1. So you've got at least the job of transferring 3 funnels over, the boilers, all of the furniture and all the fittings and everything else. And yet not one single person in Belfast who could just look across the river at Harlan and Wolff, not one of them said, why are they moving things around? And you could say that the Harlan and Wolff workforce could be paid off, which I don't believe, but I don't think you're going to be able to pay off the whole population of Belfast who could see what was going on. And not one person has talked about why is the Olympic being transformed into the Titanic. Not one person. But the people who believe in this bonkers conspiracy, they've been bamboozled into believing it by this incredible accumulation of evidence, and they just accept that. And it's too much effort to go back to the original basic evidence and find out for themselves.
yeah. So the next thing, the Five Fishermen Restaurant in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, handled Titanic bodies and is it's claimed to be intensely haunted.
Yes, I've heard about
Also,
it. Yes.
the Jane Street Hotel in New York claims survivor spirits as well. Do you think trauma on that scale leaves an imprint, or is that just good stories for tourism?
If you could directly correlate the paranormal phenomena with what was happening on the Titanic, then I'd say yes. But many of these stories that people are reporting are very, very vague and without much evidence. They're things like cold spots, footsteps, things moving or whatever. But there's not much in the way of visible apparitions that could be identified and then linked to the Titanic. So I think it's a case of people somehow making a connection and then associating it with the Titanic for good or for bad. Like the building in Halifax you mentioned, that might have a very good provenance. But New York, I'm a little bit doubtful of. But I think in general, the idea that trauma can lead to manifestations is, I think that's a bit of a rum theory in many cases, not all, but in many cases, because again, there's little evidence to support it. Ghosts just tend to appear in places where people have been seen in their life, doing things that they did during their lives. And one argument is that ghosts who died by violent or unfortunate means replay the last few minutes of their life for modern day audiences. But the vast majority of ghost cases that I've researched have been apparitions doing mundane things like walking down corridors, opening windows, straightening bed sheets, that kind of thing, trivial stuff. So if ghosts are supposed to be the manifestation, the last few minutes of someone's life ended in a violent fashion, then I can only assume that a lot of people died from the mundane way of walking down corridors, opening windows, tightening bed sheets, and answering the doorbell.
Yeah.
So not a very good way to imprint upon the environment if it requires a violent trigger to do so.
Yeah. And also, I think a lot of that is why ghosts are seen on like stairways and stuff like that is that not now, but in older days, a lot of times people would die in their homes, and that would be
Yes.
their last thoughts. They'd be carried downstairs to be either viewed in the
Yeah.
in the bottom part of their house or off to the now funeral home. A lot of
Yeah.
them died there. That's one of my that makes most sense to me.
There's just so much confusion in the field. It's impossible to know. If there is one mechanism for why ghosts appear, I don't think we're even close to finding it. They just appear completely randomly for no reason. And people you would expect to come back as ghosts don't. Whereas people who died in a very benign way, they do. So there's no rhyme or reason as to why these things happen in the first place. Skeptics would say they don't happen anyway, but I think that enough people have seen these things for them to be considered real enough, but we just don't know the
Yeah, there's
mechanism behind
something.
them.
Yeah,
That
there's
yeah,
something. It's just we
and
have
I
no
also
idea much about it.
and people always ask me this, and thank you for reminding me. When I tell them I'm interested in ghosts and that I was a physicist, they look at me in a state of disdain and say, "Well, come on, it's all a load of rubbish. Why are you doing this?" And I always say to them, "If I thought it was all a load of rubbish, I wouldn't waste my time on it. There is definitely something there worth investigating. I just don't know what it is yet." But as a physicist, I should, by rights, turn my back on it and say it's rubbish. I can't say that. I've had friends who've experienced really bizarre stuff, and I'm not going to call them liars. These people are sane, rational people from all walks of life. One of them is a high court barrister. Other people are artists, security guards, all kinds of people, and they've all encountered stuff that they can't explain. And I trust them, and I don't think they're lying to me.
Yeah. And personally, I lived in a haunted house for about 2 years. I see a lot of things I could not explain. I heard a lot of things I couldn't explain.
Yeah,
And trying to even rationalize what they were. We would hear what it sounded like a baby crying
yeah,
upstairs, and there was no one upstairs. I saw what looked like a little old lady in the
yeah,
house, full body apparition. I actually one time thought it was my wife's grandmother who lived with us,
yeah,
and I found out that she was in the bathroom. She was not in my daughter's room. So
yeah.
I walked in, I said, "Oh, grandma, you're checking on my daughter Jasmine." When I got in there, I realized there was no one there, and I saw a full apparition, and she was
Well,
in the bathroom, so it wasn't her.
I've seen a doppelganger of my mother twice when I was very young, and she was alive at the time. Nowadays, I put it down to perhaps a very young mind being a bit confused, or you know, perhaps a brain fart. In other words, your mind is just playing tricks with you. The first time I was in the garden playing with my toys, and I looked up, and my mum came out, and she was wearing her red cardigan with gold buttons, very distinctive, and she was putting washing on the line. Carried on playing with my toys, and a little while later, I went back indoors, and my mum, who coming from a shift of work a while earlier, was asleep in the front room. And I asked her what was she doing outside. And she said she'd been asleep all that time. Now, it could be that maybe I can't remember if the washing was actually pegged up. I didn't go that far. No, it could be that she did wake up and she didn't remember it, or my brain was misinterpreting or misremembering things. But the second time, she was miles away. And there was absolutely
Oh,
no way it could have been here. I was reading a book in the kitchen, and I turned and I looked over my shoulder into the. Sorry, I was in the dining room with my back to the radio. I looked into the kitchen, and we had some black tarpaulin on the counter for gardening projects. And I saw my mum again wearing her red cardigan. She was bending over the tarpaulin, and even though I knew my mum wasn't there, I just metaphorically shrugged my shoulders and carried on reading. But I then realized when she came in from the gardening centre with my dad that she must have been at least, 3 or 4 miles away. And but I put it down to my mind just having a hiccup. I've had a few spooky things happen since then, but nothing I could definitely say was paranormal. Intriguing, but I'm not sure.
yeah.
Certainly nothing as spectacular as yours, which I'm really envious about, to be honest.
Well, and that was I had one other experience in that same house. I was we and the house was a very old house. I was going up the stairs. The upstairs was much more haunted than the downstairs. I would walk in this house. You would go. It was like a stairs. Then it would turn, and then it'd be a
Yeah.
landing, and then you would go up another stairs. So I went up, and then up top is the first bedroom. There's a hallway that leads to the other two bedrooms, and I got almost to the like halfway up the going into the first bedroom, and I saw full. It wasn't the old lady. Yeah, full like it looked like a woman in white. She walked through the hallway into that bedroom and through the wall.
Yeah.
Those were probably my two, the two times that I had, I couldn't believe what I saw, but they were, very. Unfortunately, the house has been torn down now, and my wife saw what she thought was her uncle out on our porch. Yeah, he used to wear a red coat, and that's what she said. Oh, he want me to go answer the door. She said, Uncle Joey's here. And I went to the door and there was no one there, but she swore she saw him.
Yeah, a doppelganger, yes.
Yeah. So that house, it was right next to the church, and it also was right next to the oldest cemetery in town. So I think a lot of it was related to that. Is my theory on that.
Yeah.
It was just a very, that's what got me into really doing even this channel and interviewing people and trying to learn more. I just have a couple more questions for you.
Yeah, far away, yes.
Before I wrap up today. So you've been very critical of the most haunted effects, like the kind of the commercial ghost hunting,
Yes.
and all that. What's wrong with most people's how they investigate paranormal today?
So you broke up. What did you say then?
Oh, what's wrong with how people are investigating the paranormal today?
Well, you should ask what's right with what people are doing today.
Well, what's right?
Well, you mentioned the most haunted effect, and that's based on the British TV show in the 1990s and 2000, which offered a very different way of looking into ghosts than had mostly been done before. Before that, most ghost research had been done by a process called vigils, where you sit in darkened environments and you make a note of anything that happened either with notebook or tape recorder or video camera, and you wait for things to happen. So it's a passive approach. And I've been on a few of those, and they're mostly boring. Hardly anything ever happens. And then afterwards, you've got the interesting process of going through all of your footage and comparing it with what people have said to make sure that that strange footstep sound you heard wasn't someone going to the toilet at 2:00 in the morning. So you have to compare and contrast everything that's been said. Been on loads of those. I can't think of anything that happened that was spiritually meaningful. And you get access to some great places, but as regards evidentiary based or evidence collecting, perhaps not a good way of doing it. But with most haunted, they changed from passive to active data gathering. They had a medium of dubious ability, shall we say. I think you can guess what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And we don't know how much he was primed beforehand or how much research he'd done beforehand into the history of the building. So you come up with stuff that was semi-convincing. So a few things couldn't be confirmed, but some could be. And I'm thinking that was he diluting the true stuff with bull just to give the impression that he was in contact with someone on the other side? And unfortunately, what a lot of groups these days do is they have taken that to another level. A lot of investigations are now completely medium and psychic led. Everything they say is done unquestioningly, and very few groups do research, and a lot of falsehoods have been propagated and spread around. And I've been on enough of those to form my own hypothesis, psychologically speaking. I think that a lot, but not all, but a lot of psychics I've met have got some kind of deficiency where they demand attention all the time. They're the kind of people that stand on tables at parties and stamp their feet, clap their hands, and say, I want to be the center of attention. And what better way is there than in a ghost hunt by spouting absolute bull and having everyone grouped around in a semicircle, lapping up these words that they're saying and not questioning? It feeds their ego and their psyche. So I think that psychologically, I think that that's what's going on in many, but not all, many cases. I've met many psychics, and I've only met one who I thought might have had a genuine gift. The other ones are just ego maniacs. They love the attention of spouting something and everyone lapping it all up. The other thing that happened with Most Haunted was they introduced high-tech gadgetry. Before that, it was videotapes and audio tapes. So slightly before the digital era. And a lot of these groups, they do not know how their equipment works. They don't know how they can generate false positives and therefore give the impression that they've had a result, when in fact it could be anything. It could be the mobile phone going off. I mean, I've even read one report that says that faulty fluorescent tubes in a room a few rooms away could generate a sufficient field to activate an EMF meter. Most ghost hunters, they've seen the K2 meter on various TV shows, and to them, that is endorsement that the K2 can provide evidence of ghosts. They don't go back, and what they should do is take the damn thing to bits and give it to an electronic engineer or physicist and say, how exactly does this work, and how can it give false readings? As far as they're concerned, they've seen it on TV, it gives results, and that's all they want to know. The amount of groups that have added to their arsenal of equipment, I won't use the profanity there, their equipment stocks, it's astonishing. And every time a group comes along and purports to have wonderful evidence, I really do shrug my shoulders and say, so what? I wouldn't believe this. And when I compiled my ghost database, I made a policy not to include evidence from ghost hunters unless it's absolutely necessary. I prefer people's recollections, unprompted and objective. And I've found that, as well as many other people, I've found that a lot of ghost cases happen when you least expect it, when you're distracted and doing something else. The ghosts don't jump out the wall when you're sitting there waiting for them to happen. But when you're doing this, like making a cup of coffee, or you're going to bed at night, or you're reading a book and you look up, and that's when they do it. Are they doing it to get your attention? Are they doing it just to annoy you or frighten you out of mischief or whatever? The passive approach, as I've said, is boring and doesn't yield very much. But I don't think that the active approach yields much anyway because of its methodology. And I say I've only met one psychic who I thought might have had some ability, and the rest of them, they might have some kind of mental delusion where they think they've got some psychic ability and they don't, to the grandiose egocentrics who do stand on tables at parties and want the attention. So I'm sorry people are offended by that, but that's just what I've seen from my own experience.
Yeah. Oh,
I'm probably going to get a lot of hate mail for that, but so what? No, really. What I would like is some kind of unity in the paranormal world, but with the scientific and the psychic approaches being so diametrically opposed, I don't see how you're going to reconcile them. They're just so
no,
different approaches.
they are haunted. I think that they introduced the U.S. to that type of ghost hunting, and we now have 30 seasons of Ghost Adventures, which I
Yes.
think kind of is the American version of Get Haunted.
I've only ever seen about a few episodes of Most Haunted all the way through. I've seen snippets, but I've seen it a few all the way through.
I've tried
And I
watching
think the
it.
damage they've done is immense. And I say that with precision. It is damaging.
Yeah, I've
Everyone's
tried,
jumped on.
and I don't know if it's the same that airs in the UK or not. But we have our, they like some of our show on some of our they show Most Haunted.
Yeah.
I've tried to watch it. I can't get through a full episode. It's this, but for me, it's the same with Ghost Adventures. I can't, watch a full episode. There's just too much to do wrong. But I think that would be the best. It's
Yeah,
it's dramatic ghost hunting.
there's not enough evidence, undisputed evidence, either historical or scientific, and there is way too much ego in those. I mean, I think I know the show you're talking about, and I haven't watched it, but I think I know of various people in the paranormal world who fit the criteria very well. It is just so full of ego these days, and I don't watch them because I'll be tearing my hair out in frustration. And believe me, I need as much hair as I can get. I don't want to tear it all out, go bald. So, but
Yeah.
if you adopt the passive approach, which a group like ASAP did for decades, that's not good television. Sitting in the dark waiting for things to happen is not good television. If you have an active approach of someone waving an EMF meter around like a sparkler, which is the wrong way to do it, and the medium saying, "Oh, there's some kind of strange gypsy ghost here," that makes a television. Not good television, but it makes television. The passive approach does not. So I don't think you're going to see anything on the television which could legitimately be described as evidence gathering. You're going to get a lot of people who are convinced by their equipment and mediums, and it's not evidence.
Yeah. And a
Very
lot of the television today and a lot of the YouTube today, it's entertainment ghost hunting.
Yes.
You're going, if you like that kind of thing, you're gonna watch it for the entertainment value, I think, more than the evidence gathers.
Yeah. Well, again, it's all ego. I haven't seen any. No, I won't say I haven't seen many paranormal YouTube podcasts or broadcasts or whatever. But the ones that I have seen, they're all about gaining clicks and likes. And of course, that generates income for them on YouTube. And I think that's what it is all about.
Yeah.
I just avoid them because I just get so upset by them and I don't want to get upset. But that's what it is. It's ego, publicity, and generating revenue.
That's what, in the end, I think that's what YouTube is looking for too.
There's very little honesty in this field. That's what I feel.
Yeah.
Very few groups go into it with no ego and with a genuine desire to understand. They're going to places, they've done their research, they know they're supposed to be ghosts, so already they're psychologically primed into accepting that the smallest click and tick is a phantom. They should go into these places completely blind. And not blindfolded, but blind in the sense that they do not know where they're going, or they know nothing at all about it. And then afterwards in the debrief, then they're told. There's not enough of that. So I avoid all these TV shows.
Well, one of the things that we're doing was in my first investigation, I'm researching the history, but I'm going with the Team Mrs. Paranormal crew, and they don't like knowing anything about the history, so that they can, if they capture anything, then they can find if it matches any of the history. So
that's a very good approach.
interesting. So if I hear things that I've read about, yes, but I'd like to see what they gather because they're going in not knowing very little about the actual location. So it should be
Yeah,
interesting.
that is the best way of doing it. You go into these places completely blind. You don't know what you're going to, and you could do a control. You could take people into a place which you definitely know isn't haunted and see if they pick up anything. That might expose a few bogus psychics, but well, if they're telling lies, they need to be exposed, in my opinion. So that's one way of doing it, to do a completely blind approach to these subjects, but even to these locations. But even so, you do get locations where you think they shouldn't be haunted, but they are. I live on a
Yeah.
housing estate in Norfolk in England, and until about 1968, it was all green fields, woods, farmland, no houses going back thousands of years. And yet, I know of quite a few cases where there have been ghost reports in brand new builds here. Now, there were no buildings and no graveyards in this area for ghosts to come from. So where have they come? Where have the ghosts come from? And I hypothesize that the ghosts are sometimes like floating apparitions in the ether. They're looking for places or people to latch onto. And then when you try and pin them down for details as to who they are, they're going to feed you a load of crap, to be honest. They're going to lie about it. But that's the only way to explain why brand new buildings have got ghosts in them. And there was nothing there to account for them. There's a very good case, and it's only about 5 minutes up the road from me. A lady said that her house was haunted by a choir master from Norwich Cathedral, which again is not that far away from me. And I did a lot researching housing records, newspapers. I contacted Norwich Cathedral, and they said this person never existed. They've got no record of him at all. So, assuming this woman isn't telling you lies in the first place and the ghost is real, what on earth is she experiencing? This guy never existed. So it's almost as if it's floated around the ether and latched onto it and told her a load of BS, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I know a few more cases around here where the evidence isn't there when you historically research it, but the people seem to be quite genuine when they speak to you. So
the ghosts are feeding them.
Yeah, so I think, what the hell is going on? Yeah.
That is interesting. I never really looked at it that way, that that could be happening.
Well, I think it's going to be tied into poltergeist cases, which have been attributed for a long time on teenagers' minds during puberty. Sometimes unleashes a lot of mental anguish, which manifests in the environment. But I'm thinking, if ghosts just float around the ether looking for people or places, then the poltergeist could be a manifestation of that. And I've only got these few cases to talk about, but the one just up the road is fascinating because she described the guy's name, his background, where he worked. He even said that at Christmas time he wore the red robes of the choir master from Norwich Cathedral. But every single detail I was given when I checked, none of it worked out. But she is quite sure of her facts. But Norwich Cathedral say, no, this is all complete wrong. So what, honestly, what is going on?
What's going on? Yeah. It's been very nice chatting with you. Before we wrap up, where can people find your work and your books and all of that?
Well, my website is www.paullee.com. That has virtually all the research I've been working on for decades. If you're interested in the Titanic and you want a real-time recreation, then go onto my Blue Sky page, look for Titanic 1912, and from April the 1st to April the 30th, the whole story is mapped out in gruesome detail in nearly 2,100 posts. Sometimes goes into murky details, but if you want if you want the nitty-gritty as to what happened, that is the place to go. So I think it's a bit excruciating in terms of detail, but it's all there. And that took a long time to research as well.
Oh, I imagine it. So I'll make sure we'll put this up, your website in the description below. Are your books on Amazon, or your books on Amazon?
Everything's on Amazon. Yeah, my 2 Titanic books and my 4 ghost books. By the way, the ghost story that I mentioned about the choir master, that's in one of my ghost books. And as well as my research efforts to try and pin it all down, and I failed. I just couldn't find any more details about So that's probably my favorite book I've ever written, The Ghosts of Kingston and West Norfolk. So yeah, I'm quite proud of that one.
I'll make sure that I go put your either your author's link or the link to the books in the description below as well, in case anyone would like to purchase those.
Okay, that'd be great.
Also, remember, history never truly dies. It just finds new ways to haunt us. A huge thank you to Dr. Paul Lee for joining us tonight to explore the Titanic's mysteries. And, we went into a little bit of haunting as well. And you can find his many books on Amazon. The links will be in the description. And also his research on paullee.com. If you enjoyed this episode, hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a story where history and the paranormal collide. Check out the description below for all the links to Dr. Lee's work. And I will see you until then.